It's almost a cliche to say that we live in wild times, in crazy times, right? And a lot of this has to do with the information age, with how we are bombarded with so much information. And not only are we bombarded with it, but we have an appetite for it, right? Where, again, it's a cliche to say we're addicted to our devices, we're addicted to the internet, we're addicted to social media, we're addicted to the 24-hour news cycle on cable TV. And so, yeah, it's overwhelming, right? We have access to more information probably in like a 1 hour period than someone from a couple hundred years ago would come into contact with in their entire lifetime. Think about that. Think about our brains and how our brains have not really evolved that much in the last few hundred years. We're still basically the same creature that we've always been. We're still driven by many of the same instinctive programs. And yet think about how much more information we're trying to process. And this is really a problem. And I say this not as some kind of Luddite, the Luddites were people who rejected technology. I don't say this as some kind of Puritan, like, the world is somehow corrupt and has a terrible impact on the purity of our spirit or something. That's not where I'm coming from. I say it in terms of two things, or maybe three. One is how we maintain a sense of being embodied, grounded in reality, really alive to the world that we actually inhabit experientially on a day-to-day, moment-by-moment basis, without being just like caught up in all of these layers of abstract conceptual information. How true or false it is another question, right? How do we maintain a sense of being grounded and in touch with our aliveness and really taking care of our bodies on that very basic level, and not just detached and disconnected and dissociated into this stream of information and entertainment and distraction? That's a thing. It's a really difficult thing. It requires, it can't just happen sort of by itself. It requires that we actually deliberately work with it and build it into our daily schedules, that like, okay, this is my time to really be embodied, to really be this sacred animal that I am, and to care for myself in that way. And then the second piece has to do with emotional intelligence and self-regulation, like nervous system balance, right? We have this relational aspect of how our brains evolved, that is profoundly emotional, and that those emotions are experienced in a profoundly embodied way, right? They're not abstract. They're not disembodied. We experience all of our emotions in our bodies. That's where they happen. They happen through this loop between lived embodied experience and brain processing. And so when we are continuously overwhelmed, stressed, having our buttons pushed, being triggered, some of it is just happening as a side effect of, oh my goodness, the world is so crazy and there's so much information coming at me about it all the time. Some of it is happening actually very deliberately, in that advertisers and cable news companies and social media platforms actually are deliberately designed to keep us off balance, to keep us wanting more, to keep us in that never satisfied, somewhat addicted, little hits of dopamine, anticipating something more exciting and new and more, maybe more complicated or different in some way, that just keeps us engaged, right? Keep watching, keep clicking. So that creates a sense of nervous system, emotional, and relational imbalance or feeling of being just off kilter, right? So then the second question is, how do I build into my daily life the intention to deliberately spend time self-regulating So it's a big part of why I'm sharing my awareness practices through this medium. How do I downregulate? How do I come back home to my body? How do I tune in a compassionate way, in a kind way, in a self-accepting way to my emotional life and work with it? You know, I love the line from the Indian poet Kabir. He says the music of the inner life is always playing, whether you're listening or not, but when we really hear that melody, it tells us the truth. Where's that sense of truth? So in a way, so far, we've been talking about two kinds of truth and how to kind of home in on those two kinds of truth through the maze, through the haze, through the noise and all of the bombardment of all sorts of other information, distraction, button pushing, manipulation. How do I come back to the truth of my lived experience as a body, as a sacred animal? How do I come home to myself again and again and again, even though there's all of this other stuff? And how do I come back into the inquiry, the curiosity, the self-awareness around my inner life, around my emotional experience, around how to self-regulate my nervous system so that I can show up in the world, in my relationships, and for myself with greater integrity and lucidity and compassion and relational connection. Right? And you may say, well, you know, climate crisis, political madness, right? Genocide, all these things are happening. How can I be so selfish? Well, yeah, to whatever extent you're able to focus on solving those larger problems or being part of the solution for those larger problems, that's beautiful. That's crucial. And that may not only reduce suffering for other people, but it may provide greater meaning for your own life. But at the same time, one of the key pieces of being able to show up for anyone else is this sense of being grounded in yourself and in touch with that compassionate, patient, curious, emotional intelligence. So I think these pieces are key. Whatever your focus ends up being, right? And then the third piece is a tougher one to talk about because it has to do with our minds. And it has to do, actually, this is sort of a detour away from what I think most people in our subculture like to talk about the mind. It actually has to do with critical thinking and media literacy and being scientifically informed and being psychologically aware. Because part of what happens with the information age, with the bombardment of all of this different information all the time, is that there's so much that's not true. There's so much that's manipulative. There are so many conspiracy theories. There are so many lies. There's so much stuff that's just being put out there to get you to click, to get you to keep watching, and to get you to spend money. And this is true on every level, in every different aspect of our lives. And I often feel like, in terms of wanting to communicate my message and my services and what I'm passionate about, it's almost like I need a machete to cut through the overgrowth of all of the nonsense, all of the lies, all of the distortions, and it's everywhere. It's in politics, it's in how we relate to science, it's in medicine, it's in spirituality, all of it. There is this really hard to tease apart tangle of the true, valuable, important information and perspectives and facts, and then just all of the absolute nonsensical, fabricated, shiny, manipulative nonsense. And it's only gotten more intense in the last few years. So again, as part of this self-care, self-awareness practice, how do I keep coming back to clarity of mind, healthy critical thinking? I'll leave you with that.